to go on.
Do I need to on the video?
Okay, yes. So, good morning and good evening to everybody who are watching us in our channel. We come to our fifth session of today. And hereby I'm the one who's leading this session, and we'll give the first speech to this is Seida Ubaba. Yes, Seida, you have the speech.
First of all, can I start?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you in ICET for allowing me to present my paper here. I will be discussing on the topic Green GDP versus GDP in measuring sustainable development. So here, before going to my main presentation, I'd like to put some standpoint of the study, why it's important to measure the sustainable development in terms of green GDP, in spite of measuring it in terms of GDP. So we know, first let me give you a small introduction to Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a developing country with lower middle income status, and it has been fulfilling the criteria of MDP when MDP criteria was launched. It was successful in going in flow with the MDP goals, and now it's aspiring to meet the SDG goals, that is Sustainable Development Goals. And Bangladesh, the growth rate of GDP of Bangladesh is really impressive. It's having a 7.11 growth rate, that is a 7% plus GDP growth rate since the fiscal year 2015 and 16. So on the point that Bangladesh is having a very impressive growth rate, there may come a question that is this growth really going in pace with the sustainable development of Bangladesh? Because according to McSniff's threshold hypothesis, we know that when the economic growth increases, life quality increases up to a certain point. And after that, that certain point is called threshold point. And after the threshold point, if the economic growth grows more, then the quality of life may begin to deteriorate. So from here comes my research question, that is Bangladesh having a sustainable growth? So this research is all about finding that is Bangladesh is having a sustainable growth in terms of green GDP. So to reach to that point, here I have taken some secondary objectives to go to the main problem of that research. So here I will be calculating a green GDP index for Bangladesh. Then I will ascertain the determinants that which affects GDP and green GDP of Bangladesh. Then I will estimate a causal relationship of GDP and green GDP with the determinants. Then a comparative graphical analysis will also be forecasted between GDP and green GDP of Bangladesh. So first of all, what is green GDP? So we see for most of the countries, when we calculate the economic growth, we consider GDP as an index. But what is green GDP? Green GDP is an index of economic growth that incorporates in its calculation the environmental consequences. That means it subtracts the depletion or the cost of pollution that occurred due to that economic growth. So you can say green GDP is such an index of economic growth that will not just calculate what monetary values has come with the economic growth, but also it will calculate what we have lost for acquiring that economic growth. So it is more reasonable that we calculate any country's economic growth in terms of green GDP. Now, here the formula that I have taken to calculate the green GDP of Bangladesh is actually taken from a research done by Liu and Gu in 2005. So here comes the formula where it says that green GDP equals GDP minus depletion of natural resources and costs of pollution. So here the term depletion of natural resources includes energy depletion, mineral depletion, and net forest depletion. In Bangladesh, Bangladesh is a country that is really enriched with mineral resources, energy, and forest. So here I took into account the depletion of these things for calculating the green GDP index of Bangladesh. And for cost of pollution, the cost of pollution includes the damage occurred due to carbon dioxide, and it is calculated in the current US dollar of 2010 as a basis year. Now, so what is the other researchers done on this, the same topic of GDP and green GDP? Here's a little wrap up of those literatures. Like in 2001, Xu and Coggins, they showed, they assessed the difference between GDP and green GDP growth. And then it was, the method used was a cross-country analysis. And they found out that there is, in almost all the countries, the growth of GDP and green GDP coincides. And then other research was done in 2017, which again assessed the difference of GDP and green GDP. And this time it was taken, a cross-sectional data was taken and a cross-country analysis was done. And then it was found that the growth of GDP and green GDP differs as world economy advances. And then in 2015, Abdul Rahim and Noraida, they assessed a causal relationship of green GDP calculation with some of its determinants like carbon dioxide emission, trade openness, and urbanization. And it was done for Malaysia. And the method used was an ARDL bound testing approach. And they found out that there is a positive relationship between green GDP and carbon dioxide emission, trade openness, and urbanization. Then in the context of Bangladesh, two more researches have been done. Actually, more other researches have been done, but these are the most important ones that I think that would be good enough to brought here. So at 2012, Alam and others, they determined the dynamic causality between the energy consumption, environmental pollutions, and economic growth of Bangladesh. And here they used ARDL bound test, VCM, and co-integration model. And using that, they found that there is a positive relationship between carbon dioxide emission and GDP growth. Again, in 2011, Rahman and others, they examined the causal relationship between GDP, agriculture, industrial service, and the sector output of Bangladesh. And they found that agricultural and industrial sectors are the influencing factors of GDP in Bangladesh. So from here, we have determined five variables to test that how much they are related with the green GDP or GDP of Bangladesh. And these are carbon dioxide emission, nitrogen oxide emission, trade openness, urbanization, and industrialization. With that, I have formed two models for the GDP and green GDP. In that model, we have taken the model in the logarithm form so that we can perform the test. Here, let me mention that here the methodology I used to test the relationship between carbon dioxide, nitrogen oxide with GDP or green GDP is ARDL test. So here the variables taken is carbon dioxide emission, nitrogen oxide emission, industrialization, trade openness, urbanization, and other greenhouse gases. And here, with this model, the model is taken in logarithm form so that we can perform the co-integration test easily. So in this model, this model has been launched to see is these variables related with GDP or green GDP in long term or short term. And the data collected here are from World Bank's World Development Indicators, and some data are collected from Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics. And the period of study here is 1972 to 2016. That is over the data of 45 years. The study has been conducted. So first of all, when we do any test like ARDL test, we have to go through the unit root test, some unit root test to see to define our variables. So like I have conducted some tests here. One is unit root test, and another is for unit root test, I have conducted two tests. One is augmented decay Fuller root test, and other is Phillips-Perron unit root test. So in both the tests, it's found that log of carbon dioxide emission and log of carbon dioxide emission, then log of trade openness, and the log of urbanization are integrated to order 0. And the others, log of GDP, green GDP, and nitrogen dioxide emissions, these are integrated of order 1. Then ARDL bound test has been done to see that if there is any long-term relationship between GDP and all the variables in concern, and green GDP and all the variables in concern. So from the ARDL bound test, it has been found that the F statistics for GDP and green GDP, they shown that there are significant within the 1% level of significant. So for, when the F statistics value shows a significance of 1% level, then we can say that there exists a long-run relationship between the independent variables and the dependent variables. Here, this table is more important because here we have found that how much relationship, how much positive or negative relationship, what type of relationship exactly the independent variables, the variables in question have impact on the variable in the dependent variables. So here, after the test, we found that GDP is significantly related with nitrogen oxide emission, and it is negatively the relationship is negative with GDP. And again, same for green GDP, the relationship is negative with the nitrogen oxide emission. And with the industrialization, GDP, both GDP and green GDP, both of them are significantly positively related with the GDP and green GDP. But here we can see that carbon dioxide and GDP doesn't have significant relationship with each other, but carbon dioxide has positive relationship with green GDP at 10% significant level. And also urbanization has negative relationship with green GDP at 5% significant level. That means from here we can find that the green GDP of Bangladesh can be determined from some variables, which are carbon dioxide emission, nitrogen oxide emission, industrialization, and urbanization, since they show significant relationship with the log of green GDP. So after that, I've conducted another test to see if there is a short-run relationship with the green GDP and all these variables, and GDP and all these variables. So it has been found that here what's important is the ECT value. And so the ECT value for GDP is minus 0.30, and for GDP and green GDP it is minus 3.35. So the value for this value suggests that when there is shocks to the total gross domestic demand, then it will for the adjustment, when there is a shock, the adjustment that to be made for GDP and green GDP is 30% and 35% respectively in each year. After that, to test the reliability of the ARDL test, I have done some tests like Jerk-Barrow test, LM test, Brooch-Pagan heteroscedasticity test, and Ramsey reset test, and all the tests showed that the ARDL test was reliable one, because from JB test it has been proved that the distribution was normal, and from LM test it has the p-value shows that there is no autocorrelation, and all the from the heteroscedasticity test, I have found that there is all the variables are homoscedastic, and there is no specification error. So those the two models were correct, and the test over their model was correct from this viewpoint. Then also I've done the Coulomb test for both GDP and green GDP model. So from the Coulomb test, it has been revealed that the Coulomb curve is between the 5% significance level. That means the model for GDP is stable. And again, when we done the same Coulomb test for the green GDP model, again it has been seen that it is the curve lies between 5% significant level. That means the green GDP model was also stable. So after all the tests, it has been found that when we tested all the variables and tested the sustainable development of Bangladesh in terms of green GDP for 45 years, that is from 1972 to 2016, it has been seen that Bangladesh has been on the range of sustainable development in those years. If we see on the context of green GDP, what affects the green GDP of Bangladesh, we can see that nitrogen oxide emission and urbanization affects green GDP negatively, whereas industrialization and carbon dioxide emission has positive relationship with the green GDP of Bangladesh. So the reason that the green GDP of Bangladesh have a positive relationship with carbon dioxide emission may be from the threshold effect that says that until a certain point, when you have the economic growth, you also have the quality of life, that is the economic development, also increases. Since Bangladesh haven't developed that much, it's still in the process of developing, and still recently graded to a stage of lower middle income country. So it can be evident that there can be more carbon dioxide emission, and it will not affect green GDP. It didn't affect green GDP until 2016. But when we have another one graphical estimation for GDP and green GDP up to 2050, then we can see that until 2017, the green GDP and GDP, they goes in the same line, but after 2018 and from 2030, there is a 31, there is a gap between green GDP and GDP. That means green GDP shows lower portion and GDP goes to a higher position. That means though until 2016, that both green GDP and GDP of Bangladesh are in the same line and showing a sustainable development. But if it continues like this, then in the future there may come a time when Bangladesh will be overestimating estimating its sustainable development, and will not be in its range of sustainable development, because the difference between its GDP and green GDP will be higher. So here are some recommendations on this fact, that since green GDP is now negatively impacted by the nitrogen oxide emission. So Bangladesh is a agricultural based country. So here Bangladesh can use natural fertilizers to reduce the nitrous oxide emissions in its agriculture sector. And also for its industrial sector, as Bangladesh is growing more, so it needs to develop its industrial sector more. But while developing its industrial sector, it needs a proper planning, and it also needs time management. And since we from the estimated estimation of GDP and green GDP, we can see that after 2031, the gap between GDP and green GDP increases. So the government should be alert of this one, that it doesn't the gap between GDP and green GDP doesn't widen more, so that it doesn't go outside of the sustainable development, and it can fulfill its goal of SDGs. And also the research here conducted is using the data that were available in World Bank's data. So I think if we can collect more local database, the experiment will be more standardized, and there will be if there is very data set, the research will be more fruitful for Bangladesh. So a research can be done taking the local database and the more and including more variables to calculate the green GDP for Bangladesh. So here, the future focus, green GDP is an environmental index which holds more variables of concern to be examined with. So which could be used by future researchers to check if the same result holds. That means this research can be replicated again and see that if still for future years, if still there is a relationship with GDP and green GDP, are they really going in line with each other, or the gap is widening more? And also it can be replicated with the test and be tested with the local databases. So this is the end of my presentation. I'd like to thank you all for listening to me patiently. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the presentation, and thank you for this good knowledge that you have shared with us in your paper. I would like to, as we have the lack of time, I would like to continue directly with our second presentation with Mr. Baharati Onur.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Thank you. I'm good. I hope you are good and healthy. My name is Burhanettin Onur Kireçtepe. I'm a PhD candidate at Law School of Hacı Bayram Veli University. I'm going to present a relatively pessimistic paper which named Why Sustainable Development Cannot Make a Clearer Environment. I'm going to share my screen now. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I'm going with what is sustainable development. The concept of sustainable development should be described most basically as an environmentally friendly way for economic improvement. But defining sustainable development, it's a hard thing to do. It is hard because there is no single definition agreed by the states or international bodies. Each existing definition prioritizes one aspect of sustainable development because of its layered nature. The Brundtland report gives what might be the most common and understandable description of the concept. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This definition is even considered as the classic definition of sustainable development. There are more international documents regarding this topic, such as the Rio Declaration, the Millennium Development Goals, and the Rio Plus 20 Declaration. Each of them has their own different approach to the concept. The Rio Declaration has not provided a proper definition for sustainable development, but it states that human beings are at the center of concerns for sustainable development. They are entitled to a healthy and productive life in harmony with nature. With this statement, the Rio Declaration only highlights the development layer, ignoring the environmental protection layer with a very human-centered way. That kind of approach to sustainable development harms the environmental protection efforts in the name of economic development. Mostly because of this type of human-centered approach, we found ourselves in a period of the highest CO2 emission rates. These emissions came from developing countries instead of developed countries, and that has happened while humanity tried to tackle down climate change with using sustainable development as a tool too. Nevertheless, there has been another widely accepted definition of sustainable development made by the Johannesburg Declaration on Sustainable Development. In this definition, sustainable development is considered as a multi-layered concept which has economic, environmental, social layers in it. There is one thing common in both of these definitions: the lack of actual definition, and to understand this definition, one has to analyze the components on them. In the Brundtland report, one could spot the intergenerational equality. That means present generations do not use the share of future generations. From an environmental aspect, intergenerational equity should be considered not to harm nature with consuming future generations' share on it. In the layered approach of sustainable development, there are economic, environmental, and social layers in it. With an optimistic approach, one can argue that with sustainable development, all three layers rise simultaneously, without much effort or any kind of trade-off. But that kind of optimism could not be right in many cases, and there must be a trade-off between three layers of sustainable development. That is the main reason why there is no single-handed approach to sustainable development. Each country develops its own practice on it. This kind of space for interpretations or states lead the world where sustainable development becomes a widely accepted concept by the states. The Sustainable Development Goals, which are the new goals set for 2015 to 2030 for sustainable development, accepted all 193 UN member states. But also because of this trade-off situation, sustainable development is a fragile concept in the name of environmental protection. One could not agree on what is good for future generations, even if they can agree on such needs. There could be still different trade-off approaches about how to handle these needs. So one could agree that this kind of trade-off situations are both a blessing and a curse at the same time for sustainable development. They are blessing because of them developing countries eager to accept to cooperate. They are curse because both definitions are human-centric, mostly because of that when the time comes to making trade-offs, nearly all the time environment is on the losing side. Legal status of sustainable development. There is an ongoing identification crisis in the name of sustainable development. One could define it as a legal principle, concept, or just a phrase. Some scholars argue that because of it's a subject of more than 140 bilateral or multilateral agreements. Sustainable development is a part of international law in a binding nature, at least for the signatory states. Some other scholars suggest that for sustainable development is a subject of a treaty actually could not change its legal status because its vague nature. With so much variety of sustainable development, it could only be considered as a concept of international law. Also, there is another argument about sustainable development's legal role. This argument states the sustainable development is not a binding law principle nor a concept, but it is an interstitial norm which operates as a modifier for primary legal norms. As we saw, there are good arguments which favoring each definitions, but in this essay, preferred definition will be the concept for sustainable development, basically because of lack of hard law definition of which prevents one to define sustainable development as a principle. So, what does sustainable development become today? Definition of sustainable development becomes different at different times for different countries. So one could ask, do we have a unanimous definition today? It's a complicated question, and the answer is even more complicated. One cannot agree that there is a unanimous practice or even definition for sustainable development. Both United Nations adopt sustainable development goals in 2015. And because of that, there could be an argument about SDGs, which states them as unanimous as possible guides for achieving sustainable development. With the adoption of SDGs by the UN, sustainable development becomes even more umbrella term than ever. It has been impossible enough to achieve even before 2015 implications, but if after implementing SDGs, sustainable development becomes a wish list rather than a real goal-oriented legal or economic concept, according to the International Council for Science. But one could state that it is still early for that kind of judgment, and the SDGs need more time to prove their worth. Also, after SDGs, one could argue that sustainable development becomes more two-sided concept than a three-layered one. On one hand, there is social layer, which could be named as creating social justice in SDGs, and at least 7 of 17 SDGs targeted for creating social justice. On the other hand, there are development and environmental protection side. Development layer named as ending poverty at SDGs, and only 4 of 17 SDGs targeting directly ending poverty. And for achieving better environmental protection, there are only 3 of 17 SDGs which directly target for protecting the environment. And no direct connection between economic goals to environmental protection goals. With an unbalancing distribution of goals, one could argue that SDGs have only one proper layer, which also cripples other 2 layers. And in economic viewpoint, there could be a discussion which states that there are 11 economic-oriented SDGs, despite of 3 environmental protection-oriented SDGs. And because of that, after the implementation of SDGs, the balance between layers of sustainable development shattered, and it became more favoring for economy. As already stated earlier, one could not single out SDGs as only proper practice for sustainable development. There are more like guidelines drawn by the UN for the international community to achieve sustainable development. But one could argue that with such a one-sided guideline for achieving sustainable development, state practices also become even more the economic development rather than environmental protection. So why sustainable development fails? As also analyzed earlier, despite some of the legal scholars' best effort, there is no agreed definition of sustainable development. And this situation creates a vagueness for sustainable development. Mostly because of that, sustainable development becomes one of the most accepted concepts, both national and international level. Also, this vagueness is one of the reasons why this sustainable development fails. According to an empirical research for understanding the harmony of SDGs, showed that economic growth fulfills socio-economic goals while simultaneously hindering environmental goals. So, it could be argued that the concept of sustainable development cannot be sustainable because of its internal conflicts of development over sustainability. Even the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities is a relatively new principle on international environmental law. It quickly becomes a widely accepted principle in many treaties and declarations which related to international environmental law. One of the accepted areas for common but differentiated responsibility principle is sustainable development. The principle states that every country has one common goal and responsibility to achieve. But for achieving this goal, every country has its own different ways, and international community also measure their success differently, with considering the country's unique situations. Different development status of states prevents to implement of a unanimous approach for protecting the environment. Some developed states prefer a more environmental approach over economic development, but many developing states prefer economic development over environmental protection, and that hurt environmental conditions both locally and globally. The principle of common but differentiated responsibilities helps sustainable development to become a widespread concept. But it is also one of the main reasons why sustainable development fails in environmental protection. With that principle, even one could not decide if a country is successful or not in the name of sustainable development, because of principles prioritization of the development status of countries. Also, one of the seems to be pros of sustainable development is that it has a public-private partnership approach. And at first glance, it seems good, because in most cases, governments do not directly responsible about environmental harm. Private parties make that harm directly with their actions. And for that, they are responsible for environmental harm. And creating a partnership with actual harmful actor could be beneficial for protecting environment in first place. But with proper analysis, the public-private partnership approach fails in most cases as an environmental protection tool. The approach fails because of private sector's main aim is maximizing their profits. And for achieving this aim, they have a tendency for cutting down so-called non-necessary environmental expenditure. So, one can argue that without proper regulations, there is no chance for protecting the environment in nearly all time. There is also another argument about why sustainable development failed. This argument states that with the globalization, workforce, money, and other commodities flow easier. Because of this situation, some states cannot follow sustainable development goals, especially when global concern and their concerns conflict. This argument does not give any specific information, particularly about failure on the environmental protection aspect of sustainable development, but gives us a proper argument about the total failure of the concept. Also, one could argue that sustainable development fails on environmental protection because of its total failure. So, as a conclusion, we can see the global carbon project's emission in 2018. I started it with 1987 because it's the born of sustainable development in Bertrand report. And it's pretty, the emission actually speak for itself, I think. Because of its main economic approach and vague status, sustainable development could not be considered as a legal concept. On the contrary, one could argue that it's an economic concept and also even sustainable development's written status on some international legal documents could not make it a legal concept because it has more than one strong interpretation stated as respected international documents and because of its main arguments have more economic concept than legal ones. But Fullerton Pay principle has strong legal definitions and even it started as an economic solution to the environmental problems, it becomes a legal concept with unified legal interpretation made by practitioners of law and lawgivers of countries. Also, without a proper legal definition, one could not assume that the sustainable development is a legal concept. But with its economic goals, sustainable development suggests the need to compromise for the benefit of the environment. But its main concern is still development rather than the environment, and its top priority being present generations rather than future generations. Sustainable development suggests that if we could eradicate poverty for the present generation, we should avoid overdevelopment for supporting future generations' ability to develop, and mostly because of its overly economic approach. Even in the first days of its development, there was no hope for environmental protection in sustainable development. And as a recommendation, I think we need urgently a strong, legally binding definition for sustainable development. And it will be better if that definition will prioritize environmental protection. Thank you for listening to me.
Well, thank you for the good presentation to both of you. It was really wonderful preparation and wonderful knowledge that you have shared with us. And I would like to thank to those people who are watching our channel. And so as for right now, I'm going, is there any question like Seda can ask Burhanuddin any question? If you have any question, so you can ask, or any comment if there is no any question, or if Burhanuddin you have any question to Mrs. Seda. Is there any question? Are you hearing me, Burhanuddin?
Yes, I'm hearing you. And
so, do you have any question about what like Saida presented to us, or?
No, I don't have any questions.
Good. So, as Saida, do you have any question to Burhanuddin? If you have any question, you can ask, or any comment or something like that.
No, I don't have any question. It's really interesting that well, everyone was talking about sustainable development. His research is on the legality of the definition of sustainable development. It's a good research, I think.
Well, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, to those who are watching our channel on YouTube, we come to the end of our speech for this session. As we have another session, the third person who will be, we will upload it on our channel, and it will be online after when we close this session. So thank you. And as for right now, I checked that on YouTube. We didn't get any question for right now. Really, I would like to thank you once more, and thank you for attending this symposium, and all my best wishes to all of you, and good luck to your preparation and to your PhD degree.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.